In this lesson, we're going to explore pocketing toolpaths. Now, as we progress throughout this course, we'll find different toolpaths that may be more efficient in creating and removing material based on the geometry of the part. But it's a good idea to explore these different toolpaths just so we know what options we have available. In the 2D toolpath group, I'm going to go down and choose Pocket. Like most toolpaths, it's going to ask me for the geometry, and we'll explore the simple pocket routine for this hole right here. And again, the purpose of this is really just to explore the pocketing options. When I'm done, I click OK, and up comes a pocket dialog. Again, walking down the left-hand side, I'm going to go to Tool and choose the number 10 tool, which is a 1/2" end mill. And I'm going to add for a comment here, closed pocket. In the cut parameters section, you'll notice on the right-hand side we have the pocket type options. And here's where you can choose a traditional or standard pocket, but also something like facing, where you'll be facing off a boss. Island facing, where you have multiple islands that you want to face off. Remachining, which would remachine toolpaths and address the material that previous toolpaths had missed. And then finally, open pockets. For this, we're going to choose a standard pocket. And I'm going to note that by default, we have a stock to leave on walls, which is set to 0.05, and we're going to change that to 0, as well as on the floors. So this is going to cut right up to the wall and the floor. On the roughing section here, we can choose the roughing motion we want, anything from zigzag to a constant overlap spiral, all the way to a high speed and a one-way option. We'll accept the defaults for now, noting that right now we have a 50% step over. But we'll also just take a quick look at entry motion. Since this is a pocketing toolpath, we'll be entering into the part. So depending on whether your tool can plunge into material, you might want to do a ramp or a helix. And under these settings, you can choose the parameters for those entry moves. In this case, a helix, how high above the part you want to start, and what's the angle of your helix. Like before, we'll accept the defaults, and we'll explore the finishing options. Again, we can turn on and off whether we want to finish this wall. Again, we can turn this option on or off, which will actually finish the wall of this pocket. And in this case, we have one pass set to a spacing of 0.01 inches. We also have some specific options. In this case, machine finish passes only at final depth. If you recall, if we wound up doing a bunch of depth cuts, and you want to only finish the wall after all the depth cuts are done, you would turn this option on here, because then you'll do one nice pass at the final depth to clean up the wall. I'm also going to keep the tool down to minimize any tool retracts between passes. Under the lead in, lead out section, this is where we control how the tool will lead into the wall for that finish pass. Let's change the length of the line to 50%. And I hit tab just to enter in that value, and then everything else gets updated. What this means when you see a percentage here is typically the percentage is a percentage of the tool diameter. So if we're doing a 1/2 inch tool, and then we say 50%, that will of course be a 1/4 inch. And we're making these moves smaller because we don't have a lot of area inside here. And we might get an error if the tool can't enter in or enter out of the wall without violating the other side of the pocket. Same for the radius, let's do 50%. And for the sweep field here, we're going to change this to 30. This is a degree value, so instead of arcing off 90 degrees, we're only going to sweep out 30 degrees. When we're done with our entry moves, if we want our exit move to be the exact same, we can hit this double arrow here, which will pass over the values from our entry into our exit. And finally, under linking parameters, again, this is where we choose the depth of the part. We're going to put on a clearance value and make this set to 0.5. If you recall, we're pocketing out this hole here. However, we have stock that comes up a little bit, and this is our absolute 0, so we're going to have a clearance value of 0.5 above that. And for the top of stock, we'll select this point here, and we'll click OK to see the results. The beauty here is we can always make changes. And as you can see, the toolpath enters into the part, machines it out, and then retracts. The yellow portions of the toolpath represent the rapid movements, and the blue lines are feed movements. I can also turn on my wireframe display so we can take a look at this a little closer to see if we have any appropriate motion here. In this case, it didn't look like our helical move worked, so let's zoom out and briefly adjust that. Let's go back into the Pocket Toolpath, and you'll notice we have roughing. However, we don't have any depth cuts turned on. If we have a depth cut turned on, and let's just say we go 1/4 of an inch and recalculate using the preview, now we have another pass here. Let's look at our entry motion. And for this entry motion, we might want to reduce the minimum radius. So the minimum radius is the amount of radius that the helical motion will have while working into its part. Let's make that a little smaller, about 20%. And if we hit recalculate or repreview here, we'll see that now the helical motion is a little more prevalent as it works its way in. And you can see zooming in here that we have the entrance and then the helical motion in. Now, one other thing to point out here, we are rapiding right into our stock. So this is actually a good experiment to have here, because we wouldn't want to cut this in real life without identifying the fact that we need to remove this material first. The other option would be to change our top of stock. So let's do that. Let's go back into the toolpath, and under linking parameters, the top of stock is not reasonable. So let's select it and choose up here to be our top of stock. Now it's back to 0. And if you don't preview the toolpath where it recalculates it, you will get a little red X here indicating that it needs to be recalculated. So you simply select the toolpath and then choose regenerate all selected operations. Now you'll see that this toolpath feeds in from above our material and then starts helicaling through the stock. So this is the process you work through to prove out your toolpath. As you notice, I go into the toolpath, I make one change, and then I look at the results. It's much easier to do that than to make many changes and then seeing which settings worked, which settings didn't work. I'll go back to my isometric view, and I'll turn on my shading. Let's now take this pocketing toolpath and copy it like we did before. I'm going to copy afterwards, and we'll move my arrow down. And what I want to do is I want to make adjustments to this toolpath. I actually want to set it up so it's an open pocket, and I want to use those parameters to machine a different area. For example, this area. So let's go into Pocket, Parameters, and the first thing I'm going to do under the toolpath type is unselect that geometry and then select New Geometry. Now for this new geometry, I want it to be an open pocket that starts here, comes around, and then ends right here. So we can do that one of two ways. The easiest way would be to choose what's called a partial loop. And just to make it easier, I'm going to unselect the face. So now it has to be set to partial loop. So what it does here, using the prompt, is select faces, edges, or loops. I'm going to start by selecting this edge right here. And since it's set to partial loop, it wants to know what the end of the loop is. Well, the end of the loop is right here. And so it starts there and it ends there. When I click OK, if you remember, we made a copy of this operation. So let's go right down to the tool and we'll change this comment to open pocket. When we copied the toolpath, it also copied the comment. And under the cutting parameters, right from the beginning, we're going to change this pocket type to open. And here's where we can choose an overlap on which amount it'll go over. and that can be a percentage of the tool like we saw before. Without anything else, let's hit the Preview Toolpath button. We'll zoom out or zoom over so we can see how this toolpath is working. So as you can see, it's still helicing in, and then it comes to the final depth, and it does its final pass. If we wanted to do 2 open pockets in one toolpath, I can go back into the geometry, and you can see the existing chain we have here. I can right click and say add. And just like before, partial is turned on. I'm going to start right here. And that's not what I want. So I hit escape, right click, add. Let's try that again, right there. That's where I want to start. And I want to end right there. So now that I've added geometry, I'm just going to simply recalculate it. And now I have 2 open pockets. Now you'll notice I have a lot of retract motion here, going back and forth between depth and finish passes and so forth. We can go back into the parameters and adjust some of these settings to make it more efficient. For example, under finishing, we can choose to deselect one of these options here. In this case, machine finish passes after roughing all pockets. I want to turn that off, because if I'm roughing out this pocket and I'm done with it, while I'm here, let me just finish it before I move on to the next pocket. So with that unselected, let's preview this, and you'll notice half of the retracts now get removed, and we are left with a more efficient toolpath. So some of these options really pertain to when you have multiple areas to machine. But in any case, you can see how adjusting these settings will make your toolpath more efficient.